Let's go. We're doing now Friday's Chitas, which is a Kuf Mem Tes on the base at the bottom. We learned two shiurim on halacha. And basically, the Alter Rebbe said, first of all, that halacha is considered the Kesed of Torah. Every person has to learn all the halachas, and you have to come in many Gilgulim. And the reason is because halacha is Kesed. He says like this: there's many madrigas of Torah. The height of Torah is Neim Havaya or Einig Elyon or Tachos or Arba Mez Dalman the Kisufin, which nobody has a shaykhs to. Halachas are the rotzen of that tainuk, and since halachas are the rotzen of that tainuk, through halacha you have the gilui of the Einig Elyon, which is not available in the Seichel HaTorah in any madrege, because the Seichel HaTorah is a magbil and a markiv, and this is the yet. Hey says as halacha is the lowest madrege in Torah, but it's the gilui of the Tainuk Elyon. It's the ratzon of atzmus of Elokus, which does not exist in any madrege of Seichel HaTorah. There's one more thing you have to keep in mind, and that is that the Rebbe is going to bring out the idea that halacha is Torah Shabal Peh. The diak halacha is Torah, but we're not ready for that yet. So let's go now and read weiter. Ratzon Elyon Baruch, to explain further this idea that halacha has the mile of being the gilui of the atzmus of Tainuk, just like Ratzon is the lowest madreg of that time. Mechuna v'nikra v'fichach me'emes is nicknamed and called in the names, in the words of the Chach me'emes and the Mekubalim, b'shem Kesed, the crown that is above. Ubai, and this Kesed is Tarach Amud, the air 620 beams of light. V'chuli. My Kesed is begematria 620, so that this Ratzon, which is called Keser as Tarach Amud. Of course, the Neyam Havaya Tainuk Elyon would be Pnimius HaKeser, or whatever you want to call it. This would be called Keser. And now the Alter Rebbe brings a mashal. It's very, very weird because the Rebbe in this time writes about this mashal, Tzorach Iyan HaNimshal. The Rebbe doesn't know what the nimshal to this mashal is, and l'chaylet to davar hapashat what the nimshal is. So obviously we don't understand it correctly. Pirush Derech Mashal, for example, K'meshesh Amud Mebeis Chayma Gadol. Imagine if you have a home built inside a chayma, a moyer, in other words, a huge estate, and if gigantic beams that are nitzav and ba'aret standing on the ground, v'reisha mechuv v'tikra, at the top is touching the roof. Now, here comes the commentary. These beams are hollow. They're hollow inside. Like it says in my morim. This doesn't say here, but it says in my morim. And now this is my commentary. The only entrance into the beam is in the lowest floor. You have a house, many floors. Whatever floor you're on, you're stuck. There's no staircases. In the center of the house is a huge amud, a huge beam, which is mechaber agaga maritzba, from the top to the bottom. The amud is hollow. From the basement till the roof is open. And the only entrance is on the bottom. This is the marshal of halachas. Because you can only do halacha l'maisa down here in this world. The same is true also in the nimshal, Kesed Elyon Baruch Hu, the supernal crown of Elokus, which is the ratzon, that's the lowest madrege and the gili of the Tainuk Elyon. As madrege sa chachma, it's high in the level of chachma, because chachma is already a seichel dike levush for Torah, and the seichel dike levush for Torah are many pshat, remes, drush, seid, and so forth. Ratzon is the gili of the oineg, of the unlevushed madrege of Torah. And the word kesed denotes that it's keseres. What does that mean? It crowns and is hidden from and surrounds over the mind, which is in the head, which is the three levels of chacham bina v'das, seichel, wisdom, understanding. Now, and this will, which comes directly from kesed and is the lowest madrega of the Einig Elyon, Nislabish reveals itself b'tayag mitzvahs HaTorah, and the 613 the mitzvahs HaTorah, the practical mitzvahs, also the halachas, in other words the halachas. V'zayim mitzvahs derabbanan, and the mitzvahs, the seven mitzvahs derabbanan. So 613 and 7 is 620, kesed terach. Sherubim kekulam, that in the vast majority in mitzvahs maisias, they're practical mitzvahs. V'gam, moreover, that even mitzvahs, hatluyas, b'dibur, those mitzvahs that are connected to speech, like the Alter Rebbe had this in the beginning of Perek Lamed Zayin, and then again in the beginning of Perek Lamed Ches, a kaimala. We paskin that kimas svasav ha'mais. When you move your lips, it's considered a deed, and therefore the mitzvahs of dibur, which are of course brechas hamazon and limudat Torah and kriya shema, and of course in the Rabbanan you also have tefillah and so forth. The chayim heim might aim b'peis, both say b'dibur. Even mitzvahs that are connected to thought and to the heart alone. In other words, chayvas alavovas, like Achdas Hashem and Emunas Hashem and Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem, which you don't have to say anything and you don't have to do anything. Even these mitzvahs, though they do not involve a practical action, they must be done in the world of action. In Gan Eden, there's no mitzvahs of chayvas alavovas either. There's no mitzvahs at all. Right? Why? Shehu, because dafka, the physical person, is the Baal Bechir, has free will. The hatas lavav l'teva chuli, to lean his heart to good or to the opposite. Mash'enkin, as opposed to a neshama v'lei guf, a soul without a body, doesn't have free will, and therefore ein tzarech tzavei sazeh doesn't have to be commanded. Hastes that the only entrance into the beam is through the basement. That's the point. When the Rebbe writes tzarech yin animshol, because the mashal is very vague. But there's a maim in Tafshin et Ches, I think, where the Rebbe explains this mashal with more detail. The mashal from the Amud. But the mashal is the Amud is hollow, and the only entrance is at the bottom. In other words, the only place where we can do halachas. And halachas are the ratzon of Neyam Elyon, Einig Elyon, which is higher than the highest madrega of Seichel HaTeira, is dafken in this world, Neil Mamais. V'nimtza, so it turns out, Shah mitzvahs hey, that the mitzvahs are, al derech mashal, like the example, Kmei ha'amudim, like these beams, that they're standing erect, miru ma'mailas, from the highest levels. Who wrote Tanya Baruch, which is the will of the Eibishter, which is the levush for the highest madrega of Teira, the Teira, which is the madrega of Alakus, before it has any levushim of Seichel whatsoever. Add the Aretz Alzu Achumis all the way down to this low base world. V'hein, says the Alter Rebbe, they are derech mashal, by way of analogy, k'mei amudim, ha'amudim, chalulin, empty, hollow pillars that you can creep in from the inside, from the basement until the roof. There's no alamas v'esteira. Shemakif and malbish, that surround and become a garment for nishmas ha'adam erucha nishmas, the nishama and the ruach and the nefesh of a person, kishamakayim mitzvahs, when he does a mitzvah. And through this hollow beam, his nefesh ruach and neshama, with his mitzvahs, of course, go up adruma miles till the highest madregas, litzter, to be tied up, bitzrei rachayim, in the bind, in the knot, in the angekniptkeit, in the knotted up point of Achayim, of Alakus, of the Eibishter. Because since the mitzvahs are connected to the Ratzon Ha'elyon, which is the highest madrega, and the only place where you can perform the mitzvah is dafka down here, when you do a mitzvah, the mitzvah becomes a lavush, which connects you also to this highest madrega. So now we have noch a kvetch. We have tainug, which is bligable, the Ratzon for this tainug of the mitzvahs, and when a yid does the mitzvah, that Ratzon becomes a lavush to that yid. Pirush just means to say, Pirush this means to be tied up and be wrapped in the Kesed, in the light of Kesed, and Ratzon Elyon Baruch, which is Bil Deibish. In other words, Kesed becomes a lavush ta'yid. Kesed, which is the lowest madrega of Atmos Adaineg, which is not available in the highest madrega of Teira, becomes the shirt for every Yiddish neshama who learns Teira and does mitzvahs, because only in this world of Asiyah is there a possibility for doing mitzvahs. Zakter vayedei levush, then through this garment of the practical mitzvah, which from the Eibish's point of view is the Ratzon for the Tainug Elyon. From the Yid's point of view, it's the garment for the Ratzon. It becomes possible theoretically for Yid to see b'nei Hashem and the sweetness of the Eibishter. V'tzachtzachos, and the satisfaction of the thirst. Which is higher than the level of Chitzenius HaKesed. In other words, Chitzenius HaKesed would be called Galgalta, and in this case it's called Ratzon. And Pnimis HaKesed would be called Gevurus Atik Kadisha. And when a Yid does a mitzvah, through the mitzvah, which is the Ratzon, which is the Kesed, is connected to the Gevurus of Atik Kadisha. They're like the neshama of Kesed, just like I have a skull, yeah? And inside the skull there's a brain. So the brain is the Pnimis and the skull is the Chitzenius. So the skull would be Kesed, and the brain would be higher than Kesed. It would be Pnimis like Kesed. Although in other places it's brought, that mitzvahs are the Pnimis of the Eibishter Ratzon, and where God's saying that mitzvahs are Chitzenius Ratzon. And just by the way, for the record, we're going to be learning this sugya of mitzvahs being Pnimis Ratzon in the next maimer, next sugya. Now we're doing the sugya of the Chaltichel Yisikates. On page Chavtes, we're going to start the sugya of Eisem Etzeni Shal Makam. On page Lamed Gimel, he's going to start talking about Pnimis Ratzon. The Pnimis Ratzon which touches Atma Saints of. The Alter Rebbe says the answer is that it's known to Mukubalim, that the Three Bechinas of Madregas, there's a lot of levels and steps. Shesh B'chol HaBechinas, in each level there is, B'chapchino Madrega, every level and step, there's Madregas, Madrega, Madregas HaKadosh, the steps of holiness, Kama Bechinas Panim Lepanim, many levels of interior to interior, face to a face. And there's also many levels of a rear to a rear, a back and a back to a back, without an end. So true, we call mitzvahs pnimiyas aratzen, but the gabi taining is chitanias. And this is a very edel and a kudah. You know, in this Tanya, the Rebbe zeichens to Samach Vov, to the sugi of aratzen and tainuk. I'm not sure exactly how the Rebbe is zeichening, but the bottom line is pnimiyas aratzen is like a very high union, but ein l'mayla mi the enig is higher even than pnimiyas aratzen. And when a yid does the mitzvahs, so he's connecting to the aratzen. And we call the mitzvahs chitanias only the gabi tainuk. In other words, the mitzvah is like a pnimiyas aratzen. Compared to tainuk is chitanias. And when a yid does a mitzvah, he's into the pnimiyas aratzen, and through the pnimiyas aratzen, the pnimiyas becomes a lavush, which he's holding einig, ein l'mayla mi einig. Go ahead.
What were you saying that says here Samach Vov?
The Rebbe in this Tanya, it's mitzayin to Samach Vov.
Oh,
He zeichens, because there's the sugi of pnimiyas, you have the sugi of einig aratzen and Samach Vov, which is higher.
Yeah.
The point that he's saying here is that Tainuk is higher than Ratzon. I'm sorry? No, page Samach Gimel B'Zayin Vov. Ein Zayin.
We touched on it, we said
Okay, touched it. Afil am Aled 50 Amud, dann versteht man nicht. Am Aled ein Name versteht man nicht, dann versteht nicht, maybe man versteht ja. Doch dem Hine Zayin Mitzvahs der Rabbanon, this is the Derech Agav. The 7 Mitzvahs der Rabbanon, einen Echshavas Mitzvah b'fnei Atzman, chas v'shalom, to count them as mitzvahs unto themselves. There's no addition to the mitzvahs. They come from the mitzvahs Atera. And real, they're included in mitzvah Tayag. In the number 613, even though we said before that there's Keser, Tarach, it's really included in mitzvah Tayag. Lahalbish, to become a garment for Tayag Bachin, the 613 faculties and strengths of a person and the none of a person. You should know the Rebbe has a beer, a built-in Mugadik beer, which is printed in the Sefer Yei Malchus. On the beginning of Rambam, which now that I think about this is but the Rebbe says over there is Mamish the Alter Rebbe's word. It's a gewaldige kasha that the Rebbe asks. He has to feel a good kasha, and that is everybody knows how meduyek the Rambam is here, and how mesudah the Rambam is, and how by the Rambam get ultimate numerim with misparim. Everything he does he counts. In the beginning of the Sefer Ayad, again, in the beginning of the Sefer Ayad, the Rambam counts all the 613 mitzvahs. And he actually counts them twice. First he counts the mitzvahs in the Al Seder, and he quotes psukim. Then he counts them a second time without the psukim, and he connects them to the Sefer, the halachas. And he also writes there are mitzvahs that are bonon, like Megillah and Purim and Brachas and Halal, and so on. And he doesn't write the number 7. He doesn't write that there's 7 mitzvahs. There's mitzvahs that are bonon. He doesn't even list all of them. So the Rebbe says, everybody knows Aviv right that Rambam was a daikin in Misparim. And everything he's counting how many malchus, counting how many mumen. Wo gets not a Rambam is counting. Right? How many types of psalm there are in the Sefer Torah, how many halachah messinas there are in Tefillin. Anything that Rambam touches, it's a little bit complicated, he brings the numbers. You know what I'm talking about. How come when it comes to the Sheva of Mitzvah and the Rabban, he doesn't bring a number? So the Rebbe answers, because the whole idea of Teresh Baal Peh is Aruch Mer Smid Rechav Minyan. You cannot fix the Rabbanans in the Mispah. Teresh Baal fixed in the Mispah. And he explains that if you would fix the Teresh, the Mitzvah, the Rabbanan, in a Mitzvah, in a number, it would be a Shaila from L'Teisif. The Rambam is Dafke saying, it says Mitzvah the Rabbanan. Their number is unimportant because they're not defined by the limitation, they're defined by the fact that they're just radiations from Teresh B'Ksav. And that's why, notwithstanding that the Rambam was always so medayak to give everything a mispah, over there he doesn't give a mispah, and I think that's the pshat not in the Rebbe.